Hey everyone, welcome to the Formula Consulting Group. In this video, we're going to dive deeper into step 7 of the formula and show you how to write and send strategic thank you notes and why doing so will help you stand apart from your competition. If you've watched our previous overview video, you'll know that sending strategic thank you notes is part of the post-interview phase of a multi-phase strategy we recommend for matching into top programs. We call this strategy the formula. Before we jump into how to send strategic thank you notes, let's discuss why you should send strategic thank you notes. You should send strategic thank you notes because doing so enables you to stand apart from your competition by reinforcing the personal connection you built with your interviewer. Now, for those of you rolling your eyes because you feel thank you notes have become all too common, you're right. Sending thank you notes is not a novel concept by any means. Most candidates already send thank you notes after an interview. These notes tend to be bland, generic, or copy and pasted from one email to another. In fact, so many candidates do this that it's reached a point where more and more program directors A, don't even read the majority of thank you emails, B, have their assistants lump them into a folder that will never be opened, or C, simply delete them altogether. And yet, this very complacency that has taken over the culture of thank you notes is actually an opportunity for you to shine by composing and sending strategic thank you notes that are actually compelling and move the needle in your favor, which we will explore how to do in this video. Yes, this will require much more time, energy, and planning, but if you execute this strategy successfully, the payoff will be worth the hustle. Furthermore, now that step 1 assessments have been converted from a numerical basis to pass-fail, the smaller, more nuanced aspects of your candidacy, such as your appearance, your life experiences, and as discussed above, even your thank you notes may take on a greater significance, since there are arguably less objective measures by which to assess the strength of your application and your level of interest in programs. Now let's discuss how exactly to do this. The best way to write and send compelling thank you notes is to differentiate your writing style and delivery mechanism by using one of the following 4 strategies. Number 1, emails with unique subject lines. Number 2, handwritten notes delivered in person. Number 3, handwritten notes delivered by mail. And number 4, inexpensive mementos, treats, or small gifts. So let's start with how exactly to write and send compelling thank you emails. The most important part of your email strategy is your subject line, and not just any subject line, but a unique subject line. And that's because a unique subject line ensures that the recipient is intrigued enough to actually open your email and read it. Stay away from doing what 99% of candidates do, which is to write thank you. Because if you write thank you in your subject line, there's a high probability that your email will be deleted or ignored along with the dozens of others that say the same thing. Now, the way to write a unique subject line will depend on the person you're sending the email to, but the key is to make the subject line personal to the recipient. So let's go over 3 examples on how to do this. Number 1. The first example is to mention something personal you learned about the interviewer during the interview. It doesn't have to be medical or academic related. For example, one interviewer revealed that the most interesting book they read recently was a fiction novel called The Scarecrow. In that example, the subject line could read something along the lines of, excited for the Scarecrow, or just simply, The Scarecrow. You can bet that since this is the interviewer's favorite book, they will open your email with intrigue. Then, in that email, you can mention how the way they described the Scarecrow was so interesting that you went ahead and ordered a copy for yourself. This type of strategic interaction creates a stronger bond with your interviewer rather than simply focusing on rehashing interview details. The second example is to reference a topic that was left pending during the interview. Oftentimes, you will ask a question that the interviewer either didn't know or that they felt they needed to follow up on in order to provide you with a more comprehensive response. For example, let's say you've asked for more information about the program's Global Health elective, but for whatever reason, your interviewer didn't know much about that topic and told you that they would follow up with you at a later point with more information. In that example, the subject line could simply read Global Health elective, or even more info on Global Health elective. Since the ball was left in the interviewer's court regarding this topic, it's likely they will feel an obligation to open the email and follow through with their promise. And a third example is that if all else fails and you didn't learn anything personal about your interviewer and also didn't have any questions or topics pending, a safe but still unique subject line that will at the very least stand out from all the other thank you subject lines and encourage the recipient to actually open the email is to write something like, "Amazing interview." Though simple, the hit rate on this subject line is surprisingly high, as it reveals excitement for your experience interviewing with their team, as well as a happy and positive attitude. Now, so far we've discussed how to get your recipient to open your emails, but what happens when they actually do open your email? How should it read? Let's review 4 recommended best practices that will help you compel your recipient to actually read through your entire message. Number 1 is to make the email more about how you would enjoy working with the interviewer rather than about the program itself. And that's because at the end of the day, it's the people that make programs the most unique. It's also true that people love reading about themselves. So the more you write about them, the more likely they are to finish reading your email. Number 2 is to avoid too much focus on topics that everyone else mentions, such as diverse pathology, high volume, and a level 1 trauma center. Sure, these things might sound okay the first 2 to 3 times the interviewer reads it, but imagine having to read the same phrase 10, 20, or 100 times. The reader is bound to lose interest if you sound like everyone else. Number 3 is to make sure you end your email with your professional match signature, which includes your photo, and also attach your non-era CV, your personal statement, and one of your better LORs. Finally, number 4 is to make sure that before the interview even begins, you have already prepared draft thank you emails for each person you will be interviewing with, including leaving minor blanks and spaces. The reason you do this is so that the moment the interview is over, you can quickly open your email draft, fill in 2 to 3 specific details about the interview, and be the first to click send. Yes, it makes a big difference if your thank you email is the first to be received because of the following 3 reasons. Number 1, most programs discuss their applicants at the end of the same day they interviewed them. And right there, on the spot, they determine a preliminary ranking, or at the very least, write down first impressions at that time. So if your email is in their inbox by or before they construct this preliminary list of first impressions, your email will help strengthen that first impression. Number 2, your recipient is more likely to read the first email that pops into their inbox rather than the 5th, 10th, or in some cases, even the 30th email that arrives. And also because, number 3, generally speaking, even if your interviewer does not create a preliminary ranked list of candidates they interviewed on the same day, being first in anything always makes a positive impression. So prepare everything ahead of time so you can have the highest chance of being first in their inbox. And remember, in an increasingly digital world, top of inbox equals top of mind. The second strategy you should be using for thank you notes is handwritten notes that are delivered in person. This strategy works best in 2 scenarios. Number 1, when interviewing in person, or number 2, when interviewing remotely and you happen to know someone at the program and happen to be within a reasonable distance of that program. If it's scenario number 1 and you are interviewing in person, the way to use this strategy effectively is to purchase thick, high-quality physical stationery and pre-write your thank you notes ahead of time with a few blanks or empty spaces. Then, bring the letters with you to the in-person interview. The moment the interview is over, find a break room or empty bench, pull out your thank you notes, and add in a detail or 2 from your actual interview so the note feels customized to that person. Then, before you leave the premises, stop by the program coordinator's office and drop the letters off with them and ask them to please hand these letters to each of the people that interviewed you. Don't hand them off to each person yourself because that would be a little weird. It will be more impressive when your interviewer is leaving for the day and finds a thank you note on their desk or handed to them by surprise by the coordinator. If it's scenario number 2 and you are interviewing remotely, the way to use this strategy effectively is to handwrite these letters after your Zoom interview and then ask your contact at the program, whether it's a resident that you networked with previously, a friend who's in the program, or even a coordinator who you become familiar with, to please hand these letters off to each of the recipients you labeled on the letters. A key component of this strategy that increases its effectiveness is to also send the same thank you note or a similarly written thank you note via email immediately after your interview. That way, your interviewer has received a thank you note from you in a timely manner and then receives your thank you letter from your contact at the program either later in the day or in the week. Sending 2 functions as a fail-safe in the event that the second letter takes longer than you anticipated to reach your recipient. Now let's go over a few more tips that will help you write the most compelling thank you notes. During the interview, make sure to take notes on topics discussed. After the interview, integrate those details into your thank you notes. Keep it short. A handwritten note is also very personal and unique. The longer the note, the less personal it becomes. Make it shorter than your email so it doesn't feel like work to the reader. Resist the temptation to speak too much about the program. You already did that in your solicitation emails, in your interviews, and in your meet and greets. Instead, leverage your thank you notes as an opportunity to make things personal. The third strategy you should be using for thank you notes is handwritten notes that are delivered by mail. This strategy works best when, number 1, you are interviewing remotely. Number 2, you are not within a reasonable distance to visit the program. And number 3, you lack program contacts who can deliver your letters on your behalf. If this is your case, the way to use this strategy effectively is to first send an email immediately after your interview. Then, only then, drive to the post office to drop off your physical handwritten thank you notes. If you have sufficient financial resources, consider sending your physical notes via private couriers like FedEx or UPS. The reason we recommend using private couriers is because it may help you bypass typical mail screeners set up by assistants and coordinators. What we mean by this is that some PDs ask their coordinators or assistants to screen out their mail for thank you notes from residents, which often arrive by US Post in simple white rectangular envelopes, making them easier to spot and screen. But using FedEx may increase your chance of the program director actually opening your mail directly because the packaging of the parcel appears more confidential, which in turn may cause the assistant or coordinator to think twice before opening it and screening it. An added benefit of using private couriers is the optional requirement for signatures, which in the event that the assistant or coordinator receives your package, the act of signing for the package may incentivize them to show your thank you note to the program director directly, since after all, it is their signature that's on the line. Furthermore, using the signature option also allows you to check online to see the name of the person who actually received your thank you note. One last thing to cover for this strategy is that your handwritten thank you notes should not contain any sort of official attachments, matched signatures, or other documentation in your envelope. It should also contain less words than your thank you emails. The fourth strategy you should consider using for thank you notes is sending mementos, treats, or small gifts. Now, this strategy may not be appropriate for all programs, and even when it is appropriate, can be tricky to pull off correctly because there is one very important rule you have to follow. And that rule is your mementos or treats must absolutely be inexpensive and hold virtually zero monetary retail value. And the reason this is so important is because if you send a memento or treat that has any material value of any kind, no matter how small the gift, you could risk making the program director uncomfortable or creating the perception of a conflict of interest. And that is not something you want to do. The goal here is to demonstrate thoughtfulness, proactiveness, and a genuine connection with your interviewer. Stay away from doing anything that could create an implication of bribery. Another general rule of thumb you should follow when using this strategy is to, whenever possible, address your memento or treats to residents, coordinators, and the faculty, rather than solely to the program director. Now that we covered what you can't do, let's go over some suggestions of what you can do. The following are good examples of small gifts you may leverage successfully to show your appreciation. Example number 1. A candidate baked a box of fresh cookies and had it delivered to the program office after the meet and greet with a note thanking the residents, coordinators, and staff for their efforts in arranging the interviews and events. The candidate also taped a thank you note to the cookie box so the residents would remember their name every time they stopped by to grab one. This is an effective example because everyone loves cookies after a long day of work, and the cookies themselves are neither offensive nor retain any sort of monetary value. A second example is a candidate who grew up in France and happened to have an interviewer that was going to visit France in the near future. After the interview, the candidate made a highly curated list of restaurants, landmarks, and activities as recommendations for their interviewer and dropped off the list with their coordinator. Again, this is a good example of a gift that is personal and creative, but retains no monetary value because it's simply a list of recommendations. And the third example is that of a candidate who realized that one of their interviewers went to the same undergraduate university as themselves, and so ended up sending the interviewer a postcard containing the university's logo and football team on the cover with a personalized note on the back. This is one of my favorite examples because the postcard has no monetary value, but it does contain a strong nostalgic and emotional value and will help solidify the candidate's connection with their interviewer. Additionally, keychains, magnets, or pins with the alma mater logo may in some cases also be acceptable alternatives, but again, stay away from anything of material value. The postcard is the safer bet. Now that we've discussed the most effective strategies for writing and sending thank you notes, let's conclude with best practices. Number 1, when sending multiple thank you notes to the same institution, make certain that no 2 thank you notes read the same. Yes, it takes more time to write a different note for each person, and you do have other interviews to prepare for, but it is not uncommon for residents and faculty to share thank you notes amongst each other. The last thing you want is for all your interviewers to realize that the nice note you sent them was actually copy and pasted to everyone, and that it was in fact not personal at all. The second best practice to remember is that word count is very important when writing thank you notes and can differ from one medium to another. For emails, a word count of 125 words or less is a good rule of thumb. Though this is not a hard rule and there will always be exceptions, when in doubt, stick to 125 words or less. Any longer and you risk the person who just sat through 5 hours of interviews giving up and not reading the rest of your email. For handwritten thank you notes that are delivered in person or by mail, a word count of 75 words or less is a safe benchmark. The reason being twofold. Number 1, the standard size of stock paper used for thank you notes tends to be limited in space, and if you write more than 75 words, you risk having to write in a font size that is too small in order to fit it all in. And the second reason to keep your word count at 75 is that handwriting is by default harder to read than digital email font, and therefore causes readers' patience to run out sooner. And finally, the third practice is that before you make a decision to do something, ask yourself if that thing would make you feel uncomfortable if you were on the receiving end. If so, it's a good indication that you probably shouldn't do it. Which is why, for example, we emphasize the importance of keeping mementos, treats, or small gifts to items or gestures that are inexpensive and retain negligible monetary value. And that concludes this video. If you want to check out our future videos where we deep dive into the remaining steps of the formula, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. If there's a question you'd like us to delve into in the future, please leave a comment below. You can learn more about our services at www.formulatomatch.com and on X at Formula to Match.